let's move on to talking about the structure of the whole essay and the structure of each part of the essay. Now these essays, be they argumentative essays or expository essays, should have three parts. And it's the same for every kind of writing, I would say. An introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. Now these parts are not equal in terms of how much space you devote to them. Obviously you have to devote much more space to the main body than you do to the introduction and the conclusion. There's no symmetry with regards to the weight attached to the introduction and the conclusion. Usually the introduction is longer and slightly more important than the conclusion. The introduction should be just one paragraph, and this paragraph should contain 4 to 5 sentences. Now, if it has only 3 sentences, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that means that you have to compensate for the short number of sentences somewhere else in the essay, maybe by having a slightly longer main body or by having a slightly longer conclusion. The main body should be between 2 and 3 paragraphs. My advice is to keep it short, to have only 2 paragraphs. You can have 3 paragraphs, but you're running the risk of making more mistakes, or you're running the risk of running out of time. Okay. Unless, of course, you are confident in your ability to write 3 paragraphs, so you are confident in your ability, you're a fluent writer, I mean. Okay. Each paragraph in the main body should contain between 4 and 5 sentences. I think 3 sentences for a paragraph in the main body is too little. Okay, because that means that the topic is not sufficiently developed. They can have more than 5 sentences, but then again, you run the risk of running out of time. And the conclusion should be 1 paragraph with 3 or 4 sentences, or although you can get away with 2 sentences as well. Okay, but my advice to you is try to have 3 sentences in the conclusion as well. So if you add up the number of sentences, how many would you say you need to have in the whole essay? 15 to 20, I'd say, roughly speaking. And your essay should be between 250 and 300 words. There is some flexibility, of course. You can have a slightly longer introduction or a slightly longer main body, but you need to have a balance. Okay. Now let's move on to the introduction. In the introduction, you should be moving from general ideas to specific ideas. What I mean by that is you should start off with very general ideas and gradually sharpen your focus, narrow it down to more and more and more specific ideas. Let's look at each sentence in the introduction of your essay. The first sentence should contain a generalization about life today, either in your community or society or in the whole world. That depends on the topic. It also depends on your range of references, whether you want to be referring to your society or community or to the whole world. You can also refer to something called Western civilization. Okay, that's also quite common to say in Western civilization, because there are some major cultural differences between the so-called Western civilization and other civilizations. The second sentence should try to hone in on the intricacies of the issue in question. So you move to something more specific, from a generalization to another generalization, but which begins to tackle the particular issue in the topic prompt. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Now the third sentence should state the 2 points of view. Remember, if you are writing an argumentative essay, you have 2 points of view. And the third sentence should be a reference to those 2 points of view. And the fourth sentence, the final sentence, okay, in the introductory paragraph, should supply the thesis statement. Now, what is a thesis statement? That's a word that comes from the Greek language, the thesis statement. The thesis statement was where the writer provides his or her opinion and gives 2 or 3 reasons why they hold that opinion. It's just 1 sentence, okay? It's maybe the most important sentence in the whole essay, because if you ask the reader of that essay to tell you what the essay was all about, they should be able to point to the thesis statement and give you an answer. Say, well, it was about the fact that lab experiments on animals should be banned because animals are treated cruelly and because there are other ways to come up with the same results. That should be the thesis statement in that particular case. And the thesis statement is usually the most important sentence in the paragraph. It comes right at the end of the paragraph. It's very specific in two ways. The first way is that the writer states his or her opinion. Okay, so they make it clear to the reader. And the second way is they give the two reasons why they hold that opinion. Or maybe if it is an expository essay, they mention the two or three challenges faced by working mothers, or they identify the two or three causes of a phenomenon. Okay, so this is the most important sentence in the introductory paragraph, and somebody might argue the most important sentence in the entire essay. Okay. Now we move on to the main body. The movement in the main body should be exactly the same as in the introductory paragraph. You should move from general ideas to specific ideas. The first sentence of each paragraph in the main body, remember how many paragraphs should we have in the main body? 2 or 3, exactly. The first sentence should be the so-called topic sentence. The topic sentence is the key sentence in the whole paragraph. The sentence that tells the reader what the paragraph is about. Okay. And then the second sentence should be an elaboration of that. What do we mean by elaboration? Elaboration means development. So in the second sentence, you should become more specific, or you should start giving details. Okay, we're going to look at an example in a minute. Now the third sentence should give an example. And when we say example, we mean something very specific, not something general. Okay, remember that the movement is from general ideas to specific ideas. So by this stage, when you come to the third sentence of the paragraph, that means you have to really narrow it down. And I would argue that the example is the most important sentence in that paragraph. It's not the same thing as the introductory paragraph. Okay, here you need to be extremely specific. And this example can be taken from public or private life. What I mean by that is, it can be taken from your own personal experience, something that you yourselves have had to deal with in the past, or it can be taken from public life. It doesn't have to be about you, or about something that you are familiar with personally. And it doesn't matter whether it's taken from public life or from your own personal experience. What does matter, though, is that it should be very specific, okay, and relevant. And the fourth sentence, or maybe the fifth sentence, can be an identification of the effect of what happens, in this case, with the example that we have provided, what it resulted in, what it led to. Okay. It doesn't have to be that. There is some room for doing other kinds of things at this stage in the paragraph, with the fourth and the fifth sentence. You have to find a way to wrap up the paragraph and move on to the next one. Okay. So it can also contain a deduction or an inference, which means therefore or so. Because of what we saw here, we have to do something, we have to take some kind of action, or we have to change our way of thinking, or it's a way of linking the third sentence with the fourth sentence, is to say, so what? Because of this example, what does that mean? Remember, after the 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs in the main body, then you come to the conclusion, which is the last paragraph in the whole essay. Now, in the conclusion, the movement of ideas is from the general, it still stays there. All the ideas in the conclusion are general ideas. There is no specific idea in the concluding paragraph. Okay, so it's not the same as the introductory paragraph or the main body, where you move from general ideas to specific ideas. Here you use general ideas throughout. Okay, you generalize throughout the paragraph, which is another way of saying you cannot develop your ideas in the conclusion. You have to wrap up the essay here. Okay, and the discussion has to remain on a very general level in the conclusion. Okay, here's my suggested model. The first sentence should sum up your main points and should include a word that indicates to the reader that you are summarizing. A phrase such as to sum up or in conclusion. And there are other phrases you can use as well. So you sum up your main points. In the second sentence, you can qualify the validity of those points. What I mean by that, here's where you can be a little bit more balanced and flexible and say, yes, that maybe what I just said before, what I argued before, doesn't apply to everybody in all cases. There are some cases when it's not valid, or to say for whom and when they're valid. And the third sentence could be a wish. Okay, you finish the essay by making a wish. And if you do so, make sure that you use the appropriate structure for wishes. So you need a wish type 1, which is I wish plus simple past. I wish people realized that that's what we need to do from now on. I wish people became more responsible. Okay. Now, we're going to move on to look at the suggested language for the argumentative essay. I think that's not clear enough, but you can follow from your handouts. You have it in your handouts.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Now, let's have a look at the suggested language for the argumentative essay. We start with the introductory paragraph. These dots at the beginning stand for the topic, which is your work. You have to figure out what to say there. You have to fill in those dots. How? Remember what we said earlier when we talked about the action plan. Let me go back to the action plan. Here's the action plan. Point number 2, task number 2 is to paraphrase the main ideas in your head. Why? Because here, where the dots are, you have to provide a paraphrase or sometimes the exact words of the topic. So what is a fairly controversial issue? If we go back to our sample topics, here's what's a highly controversial issue. Whether students should work part-time is a highly controversial issue. Whether the government should crack down on reckless driving, now I would say that's not a highly, it's a fairly controversial issue, okay? Whether parents should take a course in parenting. Whether experiments on animals should be banned. That's what is a fairly or a highly controversial issue, right? Or whether tourism is beneficial or harmful for local people. Whether technology is a help or a hindrance in promoting literacy. But remember, you have to paraphrase that a little bit. So here, is technology a help or a hindrance in promoting literacy? How would you paraphrase that? Well, you can simply get rid of help or hindrance and say, whether technology promotes literacy or not is a fairly controversial issue. Or you can paraphrase the word promoting. Whether technology encourages literacy, fosters literacy, that's a proficiency level word. Okay. Here you can demonstrate your command of words. So you can say whether technology fosters literacy is a highly controversial issue. Okay. Or with fast food restaurants. Whether fast food restaurants provide a useful service or not, okay, do more harm than good, whatever, provide a useful service or benefit people or harm people. Okay, here's how you can paraphrase that. Whether fast food restaurants benefit people or harm people is a moot point, or is a fairly controversial issue. Okay, we figure that out. So then we have to decide what the topic is, paraphrase it, and we start the essay with the first sentence in the introductory paragraph. Okay. It is a fairly or a highly controversial issue that divides public opinion, or that divides people into two opposing camps. Some people, or some prominent members of our society, argue that, and we have more dots. And then you can use some of these words, hurts, benefits, while critics disagree with them, claiming the exact opposite. Now here, what do you have to do? You have to state that, let's go back to our action plan. And you have to state, actually let's go to the introduction, the structure of the introduction. You have to state the 2 points of view. Okay, the 2 points of view. So, let's say if we're talking about students working part-time, what are the 2 points of view? That students should work part-time, and the other point of view is that they shouldn't work part-time. Okay. So in this case, you can use a word like benefits and say, some people argue that a part-time job, remember we have to paraphrase things, so instead of saying working part-time, we can say a part-time job. So some people argue that a part-time job benefits students, while critics disagree with them, claiming the exact opposite. And this can work with just about any topic. And then we move on to the next sentence. While both points of view are valid, each one for different reasons, I'm more inclined to agree with the former view, or I'm more inclined to agree with the latter view. Now, if you did not know these two words, former and latter, is when you have referred to two things, let's say the UK and the US. The first one is the former, and the second one is the latter. Okay, so I can say people in the US prefer to drink coffee, whereas people in the UK prefer to drink tea. Right. The former versus the latter. Right. And then you can say for two main reasons. Namely, you provide the first reason and you provide the second reason, very briefly. And that's the end of the paragraph. Okay. So that's a sample introductory paragraph. It works with most topics. Now, depending on how controversial the topic is, you have two options. One option is if it's not a highly controversial topic, you can say fairly controversial issue. And then use divides public opinion. But if it's a highly controversial issue, then you say highly controversial issue, and you use divides people into two opposing camps. So you have to be careful with how strong the language you're using is. If the topic is not highly controversial, do not use strong language. Say fairly controversial, and just divides public opinion. But if it's highly controversial, then you can say highly controversial and divides people into two opposing camps. Okay. Alright then, and then we move on to the main body. I don't have much suggested language for the main body because it really depends on the topic in question. Okay. But if you have the language for the introduction and the conclusion, that saves you time to try to come up with the language for the main body. So if you practice memorizing some of these key sentences, they are time savers. It means that if you can dash out the introductory paragraph in 5 minutes and the concluding paragraph in 4 minutes, that gives you 21 minutes for the main body. So you save time. What you can do with the main body is to start with these sentences, the most flagrantly obvious reason why. You mentioned the topic once again. Part-time jobs are beneficial, or the opposite, are harmful, is that. And then you move on to elaboration. Remember, in the main body you have to provide elaboration. And how do we begin to elaborate on something? We use linking expressions such as more specifically. More specifically, and then you elaborate. And remember what the third sentence needs to be. The third sentence needs to be an example. So you can say something like, a case in point is, and you provide your example. And then the fourth sentence needs to be an effect of that example. So you can use an expression such as we see, and then provide the effect. Let's move on to the third paragraph, which is the second paragraph in the main body, but the third paragraph in the entire essay. Remember that you have already provided the first reason, so you're not going to use the word the most important reason or the most obvious reason. You're going to use the word another, because now you're moving on to the second one. Of course, you can also use the word a second reason, a second challenge, a second quality. Or you can use the word another important reason why, da da da. Again, you need to follow exactly the same structure as with the second paragraph. You need to elaborate. So you can use transitional expressions such as in other words, and then provide your elaboration. Then you move on to give your example. And you can use transitional expressions such as for example or for instance. And I have given you a little sentence here that if you are running out of ideas because you have already written 3 paragraphs, let's say you're under time pressure and you don't know what to say now, here's a little sentence that you can tack on to the 3rd paragraph, and most likely it will make some sense. Such effects are quite obviously tremendously beneficial, and a concerted effort must be made to achieve them, or the opposite. Such effects are quite obviously downright pernicious, and a concerted effort must be made to avoid them. Now, I know that probably you have some unknown words here. I've deliberately included these words so you can gain a few points. Okay, some sophisticated words like pernicious. Pernicious and detrimental are 2 important words to know. They mean harmful. So they give you a little bit of a variety there, and you can display your command of advanced to refined proficiency vocabulary by using one of these 2 words. Okay, pernicious or detrimental. We can say smoking is detrimental to our health. Or things like gun ownership is downright pernicious because it leads to many crimes. Concerted effort is a set phrase which means an effort by all parties concerned, by the government and by individuals alike. Okay. And then we move on to the last paragraph, the conclusion. Here you can start by using the phrase in conclusion or the phrase to sum up. And then you restate the topic. Part-time jobs or jobs for teenagers or lab experiments, whatever, will continue to be a somewhat contentious issue or a deeply contentious issue. You will use the word somewhat if the topic is not highly controversial, and you use the word deeply if it is highly controversial. The word contentious is a synonym of the word debatable or disputatious or controversial. And again, you gain a few points by using a sophisticated, refined word at that level that causes widespread disagreement amongst those who care about it, or that polarizes public opinion and threatens to radicalize our society. Only use this phrase if we're talking about something which is highly controversial. Otherwise, the language is way too strong. Okay. Then here's a suggested way to wrap up the essay. For all the reasons detailed above, my sympathies lie with, and then you mention the point of view that you subscribe to. And then you can finish by saying, each one of us is different, however, as our family background and social circumstances shape our way of thinking. So not in the least would I expect others to adopt my point of view. Okay, here's what I said earlier, that you can include a sentence that qualifies the validity of the points you're making. You say they don't apply to everybody. Okay, this is my way of thinking. I don't expect others to agree with me. Right? So here's a sentence that does exactly that. That's the function of that sentence. Okay, it uses phrases such as family background and social circumstances. Important phrases to use in an essay. Way of thinking. Okay, point of view. And then you can finish with a wish. For example, I hope that future generations will, what will they have to do, tackle this issue in a way that will benefit our society as a whole. Okay, so this is an appropriate way to wrap up the essay. Now obviously all of this is completely theoretical up until now because we don't have a specific topic. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will look at the prompt for a model argumentative essay, and then in your handouts I have the whole essay. We're going to go over the whole essay with a fine-tooth comb. I'm going to explain how to integrate these sentences into the essay. Okay. And then, after we do that, we're going to look at expository essays, and at the end I'm going to ask you to write an essay yourselves. Okay.